So now we are back. Welcome. Sorry for a little bit of delay. Very proud having Hannes with us, and you are talking to us from Stockholm, I think. No, from Sweden. And
yes, I'm at the epicenter in Stockholm.
Okay, cool. So I don't want to steal your time because we have you have a very interesting presentation for us and for our participants. So looking forward to your speech, and I will be back for comments and questions after your presentation. So stage is yours, Hannes. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for having me. And hi, guys, everyone out there. It's awesome to be with you. I think this is a very exciting format. I think we should do a lot more things digital. Why in the bloody world would you want to get people into the same room when you can communicate in this way, right? So I'll have the pleasure now to share a few of my ideas and insights and some updates from the biohacking community. So let's roll. Let me just share my my presentation here. All right, so the topic of my little talk is biohackers at the forefront. And if you want to harass me on Twitter during and afterwards, you find my Twitter handle at the bottom. Okay, let's go. So the whole concept of biohacking and exponentially developing technologies and the democratization of technologies are based on this observation that, yes, we are witnessing very, very rapid technological advance across a number of fields. And I have a background with Singularity University that some of you are probably familiar with. And within SU, we often speak of these exponentially advancing technologies and the fact that they are converging. Because if it was simply a single technology that was advancing exponentially, we would be quite confident in predicting the development that this change could lead to. But it becomes very, very complex when you have converging technologies that are changing at the same time and affecting each other. So when we are seeing at the same time rapid developments in artificial intelligence as well as in biotechnology and neuroscience, it becomes very, very complex to try to understand how this is transforming the world and business and ultimately ourselves. Because this, for me, is a dimension of exponential technological development that we often do not think about. We see that companies are being transformed, media is being transformed, industries are impacted, but way too often we forget that all these technologies, they are changing us. They are not changing just our minds, as in the way where social media or Netflix is becoming so addictive that it's actually taking over the reward systems in your brain, forcing you ultimately to binge watch Netflix episodes or YouTube Russian dashcam videos, right? But they are also transforming our bodies in new ways. And this is a little bit what I want to dig deeper into in this setting. But perhaps for those of you, ladies and gentlemen, who are not familiar with the concept of biohacking, allow me to give a very quick introduction. The field of biohacking, or should I perhaps say the biohacker movement, which is, to me, it is a social and a cultural and a technological movement, which is based on the insight that technology, and in particular powerful biotechnologies, are becoming democratized. This means that these are technologies that just a decade ago were expensive and complicated and could only be operated by very specialized professionals in big companies or in university research institutions, that are now becoming available to pretty much anyone. They cost very little. The user interfaces have become a lot simpler. Your grandma or your 10-year-old neighbor can also play with these technologies. And this is a very powerful trend. And this is the very enabler for the whole biohacker movement. And when I speak of biohacking, I of course use hacking in the original sense, not meaning hacking for the purpose of breaking into something or taking something apart with a malicious intent, but hacking in the sense of experimenting. For me, hacking and biohacking is very much about experimenting. And my favorite word when I speak about biohacking is exploring, because we see these technologies and we need to discover them. We need to explore them. We need to understand what we can do with them. That is the most exciting journey. And here are a few illustrations of different dimensions of the biohacker movement. We have do-it-yourself biologists, people who develop their own software and hardware and who perhaps build their own lab equipment or work with typically modifying bacteria or yeasts or mushrooms for material science or for bioscience or even for medicine. We also have a different dimension, which is the quantified self movement, this idea that now, thanks to wearable sensors and smart apps, you can monitor all kinds of things about yourself. And going beyond just monitoring, you can also experiment. You can change your habits and you can actually measure the results on your sleep patterns or alcohol consumption patterns or similar, and see how that affects your health and your body. There is another dimension of biohacking, which is the body modification aspect. So this is something which has very, very deep roots within human civilization. Body modification, it goes back to prehistoric times. We find Ötzi the snowman that was found in the Austrian Italian Alps. He had a number of tattoos on his body. We find mummies from ancient Egypt with tattoos, and we find skulls in pre-Incan Peru from predating the Inca civilization in Peru that have elongated skulls, where parents work to modify the heads of kids to give them longer and, in their culture, more beautiful heads. And so the idea of body modification is a very, very deep human trait and something we've always been doing. But it's now very exciting because we are now introducing smart technology into the body modification scene with chip implants and smart implants that can perform a lot more advanced functions. And of course, perhaps the most mainstream and most broad aspect of biohacking is the health and fitness, nutrition, optimization movement, which applies not just to professional athletes, but also to office guys like myself who simply want to optimize our performance during a work day. And in order to do so, we modify what we eat and what kind of supplements we take and how we take our coffee and all these things. So these are some of the broad brushstrokes of these superbly dynamic and very interesting social movement, which is the biohacker movement. Now, just to give you a couple of illustrations, biohackers, for example, it also includes how you do stuff. You can make your own lab devices. Here's an example of a 3D printed test tube centrifuge, which instead of buying a finished equipment from a medtech company, you can just 3D print this plastic thing and power drill. And that actually makes for a quite decent centrifuge for the price of $1 or $2. Another fun thing we did last month, we had a workshop with the Biohackers in Stockholm where we did smart tattoos. We painted our skins with conductive ink and glued LED lights to various parts of our bodies, and then we set them alight, and we all looked a little bit like Christmas trees, and it was a lot of fun. So this is exactly the idea of exploring uses with tech. There may not be a specific goal in sight that we want to make a specific analysis of something else. It's all about just learning new technologies. Another good story to share from Quantified Self is this gentleman that I know, his name is Thomas Blomstedt, he's from Denmark. Thomas cured his hay fever just by measuring his own sneezes over the course of several years. So suffering from severe hay fever, he started measuring, and then he started mapping in what locations and at what times and related to which diets he had increased sneezing. And by changing his lifestyles, moving house, etc., etc., he actively cured his hay fevers without, in fact, any kind of medication. So this shows the power of biohacking-based therapies, that in fact there's a lot of things you can do without having to resort to pharmaceuticals if you're looking to address personal health issues. So biohackers are different, and the research, if you can call it so, within the biohacking community is different from that which takes place in universities or in corporate innovation labs, because biohackers, in my experience, are often driven by purpose and passion, and perhaps above all curiosity, rather than profit or academic merit. And here is an image from when we opened the wet lab in the Stockholm Makerspace, where biohackers now can come and learn about genetic modification, etc. It's a citizen lab open for anyone, where you can learn the trade. And if you want to find a biohacking lab in your city, there is an awesome resource at diybio.org where they list internationally all kinds of spaces. So find something in your area if you want to connect. I also wanted to share, here's just a handpick of online biohacking resources. This could example be open source hardware that you can buy, or complete protocols for performing hacks and experiments. So I'm not going to look through this, but you can check this out later. It's some pretty interesting resources. Sci-Hub is of course another wonderful resource if you want to check the scientific aspects of anything, which is also available for free, and I encourage people to use. So just to take a little bit of a human twist to these stories about biohacking, here are a few examples of biohackers from around the world who have actively taken the step of modifying themselves with technology in order to expand the human experience, and that I find incredibly thrilling. So here's, for example, the lady with the beautiful striped dress, Moon Ribas, who has an implant in her arm that vibrates, that she has connected to the global system of seismographic sensors. So it means that if there is an earthquake anywhere in the world, Moon feels it in real time in her own body. She is connected to an entire planet. And she does fantastic performances that I've had the pleasure of witnessing, where she goes on stage, she plays the drums or dances, conveying with her own movements what the crust of the planet is doing right now. So it's quite a spectacular experience. The gentleman you see here standing in the street, his name is Frank Swine. Frank has hearing cochlear implants, hearing aids that he has modified so that he can hear Wi-Fi. Now, for me, that is also a fantastic thing to do, meaning that you upgrade your body with a new sense that simply could not have existed 100 years from now, or any time throughout human history. But now, for me, is an absolutely relevant sense. We've all seen the humor version of the Maslow pyramid of needs that now has Wi-Fi as the very bottom item before food and shelter, right? So that experience of not being connected is something that people of the growing generations are not particularly comfortable with. And in this sense, and the fact that we are entering this hyper-connected world in the quettabyte era, it means that, to me, hearing Wi-Fi is just an awesome upgrade of what the human experience can entail. The lady in black you also see here in this image, her name is Left Anonym. She is a role model for many of us biohackers when it comes to body modification. And Left, for example, has experimented with magnetic implants in her hands, giving her the sense of magnetoreception, where she can not just pick up objects but also perceive magnetic and electric fields. This is something that exists in nature. There are numerous animals that have this capability, for example, dolphins and other underwater animals. This is another, for me, interesting way of expanding the human experience. The gentleman with the little implant on his chest here on the far side, this is his name is Michael Kasanovic, is another good friend of mine, and Michael, he has implanted this little device which is called a NordSense, made by a company called Cyborg Nest, based in the UK. And this little implant, it vibrates when you face north, and it gives you the ability to always know the direction of where is north. So in fact, it feels the magnetic fields of the planet. And this is also something that we know exists in nature. Birds navigate by way of feeling these magnetic fields in the planet when they migrate all across from Africa to Sweden in the spring and autumn. As for myself, I like to call myself a vanilla biohacker, because I am my interest when it comes to body modification and human augmentation technologies, I'm looking for the broadest user cases that we can discover. And what we have dug quite deep into here in the Stockholm biohacking community is, of course, chip implants, animal use implants, veterinary implants designed for cats, dogs, sheep and horses, and easy to inject, takes a second, doesn't hurt in particular. It's well known, it's been tested on billions of animals. And what these implants do is that, here's an image of my hand, it shows all the devices and tokens that I managed to replace by having a little implant here in my hand that sits between the thumb and index finger of my left hand. It's made my life a bit more practical. I don't have to bring any badge to work. I don't have to bring any plastic card when I go to the gym. I can store my business card in my chip. I can I can pick up my membership points and enjoy discounts in hundreds of shops all across Sweden. And I can unlock my personal devices just using my implant. And ultimately, the way I see these implants is that they are a personal key to my version of the Internet of Things, because it allows my body to speak NFC, the language that all these devices speak. And instead of having to make the machines understand Swedish or English, I simply touch them with my hand. And it's a novel interface that when you take the best advantages of biometrics, meaning that you have a technology that's always available, like your fingerprints or something that is always accessible, but at the same time you use the best of cryptographic and digital solutions, meaning that you can replace, reprogram, and ultimately encrypt your digital communication. So implants is a very interesting technology, and I think this proves itself because of the enormous interest that these implant activities always gather. And I've been traveling the world over the last 2-3 years hosting implant parties. Right now I'm doing about one a week, traveling internationally, and whenever I go somewhere and wherever I go, there is an amazing interest for people to experiment with this technology. And I think there is a massive unmet need for human augmentation technologies. People who are perfectly healthy but still make the active decision, informed, voluntarily, to make an upgrade of their bodies, simply because they think it's a very useful thing to do. Not because they have health issues or there's something they need to cure, but because they want to improve. And a wonderful example is that last year I had the pleasure of being part of the world's first train ride using implants, going with the Swedish National Railways from Stockholm to neighboring Uppsala, together with this group here. And we all had our tickets on our chip implants, and we rode on the Swedish National Railways, just holding up our hands to the conductor that came to check our tickets. And that for me was an awesome little foretaste of the 21st century. So very enjoyable. There is another dimension, of course, of biohacking and the democratization of biotechnologies, and that is the falling prices of sequencing DNA. And if we take the example, the well-known example of reading a human genome, here you see in my somewhat condensed illustration that the price to sequence the human genome has fallen in just the last 20 years or so, from a price where it cost as much as jet fighters at the turn of the century, to a few years later falling to a price of around $1 million, to a couple of years ago breaking through the $1,000 barrier. And we can expect, and we are expecting, those of us who follow the developments of this technology, that we will hit about the $1 full genome sequencing a couple of years into the next decade. And this, for me, is a very radical democratization of these technologies. And I think it will be as ubiquitous it is to carry a phone. We will also be carrying DNA sequencers with us in the future, just automatically scanning our food, scanning any contaminants in our setting, etc., because it will simply be so cheap and so available that we can do it as a matter of routine. And there are wonderful and beautiful examples of biohackers exploring the genetic information domain. And here is, for example, a lovely case with this gentleman who has sequenced his own DNA and uploaded it completely to GitHub, and is actively encouraging people to copy it, modify it, merge it, publish, distribute, sublicense, and sell copies of his DNA. He's practically saying, hack me and do what you want with my genome. And I think that it's tricky to understand what this means in the long run, but I think it's a spectacular and very interesting development that people simply can do this. And what it means from a legal perspective is, of course, that if you put your entire genome out in the public domain, it means that no one can actually claim any ownership. Ultimately, if you may have some very rare mutation that turn out to be very useful later on, then it's in the public domain, which is a very biohacking thing to do. I won't, in the medical field, in clinical trials, we already see a number of therapies being applied to humans using genetic modification. So this is just a matter of time before they are more broadly picked up also by biohackers. And there has been a few examples in the last couple of years of people doing do-it-yourself gene therapies. There is, for example, Tristan Roberts, whom last year injected himself with a potential cure for his HIV infection. It turned out he did it so live on Facebook. Unfortunately, it turned out it didn't have any significant effect at first injection, but it was a very brave thing to do, so hats off. There is also Lish Paris, who runs a company called Bioviva, who is working on gene therapies and has indeed experimented with herself with these therapies in order to work with rejuvenation and slowing the aging process, and who is raising money in order to broaden this offering. And there is one of the most well-known biohackers, punkers, which is Josiah Sainer, who runs Odeon Lab, which is a resource for if you want to buy do-it-yourself CRISPR kits and similar. And Josiah has also publicly injected himself with suggested gene therapies, however, with somewhat unclear results. But these persons are really pioneers, and they are just the very, very beginning of a much, much broader experimentation. Of that I'm absolutely convinced. So, just to round off, a couple of more philosophical reflections. Why should we do all these things? Why should we modify ourselves to hear Wi-Fi and to work to rejuvenate ourselves with gene therapies? Well, for me, the perspective is that we as a species, we are shaped by our history, our evolutionary history, and our bodies and our psychology were formed in a very, very different society from the one we live today. In fact, we are in many respects living fossils with many very ancient aspects to our bodies that were designed for these different world that we inhabited. And if we look at our world today, these are often weaknesses. Just to pick one example, our craving to eat fat and salty and sweet foods that have served us very well during our days as hunters and gatherers, but now in our current era of industrial food production is in fact harmful to us. But there are aspects of disease wear and aging. We have very limited sensory universe. If you compare to the animal kingdom, we have the worst sight, we have terrible smell, we don't hear very well compared to many other animals, and there is a great potential for us to have much finer understanding of the world around us through direct sensory experiences that I am very, very curious to explore. And we also have significant cognitive limitations. Just speak of memory, something we're all perhaps struggling with from time to another, and also very much of our psychological motivations and emotional responses, such as the example of our need to eat certain foods, or xenophobia, or the instinct to hoard resources, which also was useful in a time when we lived in very scarce worlds, but today is part of a system that is overexploiting the planet. And my case is also a moral one. We should modify the human experience, in my view, actively. We should actively pursue that as a goal, because the world is different, because we live in a world of abundant information, a super digital world. We live in a world with an abundance of calories, right? We also live in a world which is hyper connected, with billions of connected devices and augmented reality layers soon entering upon our visual fields. We also live in a world with very different pollutants than one we grew up with. No one is eating poisonous mushrooms or being eaten by lions and tigers nowadays. Instead, we're killed by pesticides, microplastics, and medicines that are poured and exist in our water. So what I want to say, and my sort of conclusion, is that we are democratizing these technologies. We must use them for good moral purposes. We are seeing that scientists have the ability now to using DNA as Lego bricks and building synthetic life and synthetic organisms, even to the point of building eukaryotic cells. And the way I see this is that we, as a species, as a civilization, are breaking out of these meat bags that we're born into, out of this planet that has been our home up to now, and that in this sense we are like an acorn that is becoming a tree. And that we, this generation, the current generation, in our lifetimes, will experience a very, very fundamentally different human experience than what we've known so far, because of the technological developments. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I'm very happy to continue the conversation over chat and to take a couple of questions. Thank you. If you want to contact me, here are my contacts.
Hey, yeah. Thanks, Hannes. Quite interesting. And we have some comments and questions. I think the one you already answered by explaining your train travel. Like, do you have any implants? And if yes, which one? And what is your experience? So you have really this still in this implant, no?
Yes, I have one implant that sits here, and I'm expecting to get at least one more now during the course of 2018 with better and stronger functions.
Okay. Oh, nice. Cool. And I don't have anyone. I'm just like quantifying myself. This is like the version 0.1, you know, like.
Right. So there's a good principle, Thomas, that you start with the wearable so that your body gets used to these sensors and that you habitually adapt yourself to them. And going from wearable to implant is actually a very easy step after a while.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, and then the other one, Jackie was asking, where do I find more information about these events? I think this parties, is there like an organization or website or?
No, there is no particular organization, but it all depends on where you live. And if you're interested in running an implant party event in your city, feel free to get in touch. I'll be happy to connect you. Ultimately, the only thing you need is a bunch of friends and a piercing professional who can do these implants in a self and controlled manner. So it should be quite easy to find if you just contact a local piercing studio. But I'm very happy to facilitate if someone wants to get in touch.
Okay. Yeah, and then Jose makes a comment, I use E4 to understand my emotions. You know what? I don't know what E4 is, so.
No, I have to admit, he needs to elaborate a little there. There, Jose, please elaborate.
I live in Turku, near. So, Jose, best you get in touch with Hannes, because now we have to switch to the next session, but very interesting and was a great pleasure having you with us. And thanks for the statement at the very beginning, why we don't do more like this, what we are starting now with Helvetia. And it was a great pleasure having you with us for this very first edition premiere. And yes, who knows, having you another edition or on an offline meetup in Stockholm in the next edition. So thanks and wishing you a great
Thank you.
afternoon.
We'll be in touch.
Absolutely.
My
So
pleasure
thanks,
entirely.
Hannes.